Hi, my name is Richard and welcome to the Stove Yard. Today we're going to take a look at one of our favourite stoves here in the Stove Yard, which is the Graphite 5 by High Flame. So let's get it lit first of all, and then I can show you the user controls and explain a little bit about the stove. Okay, so whenever we're lighting the stove, I'm just going to use, there's a couple of different ways of lighting stoves, but I'm just going to use the traditional method. And what I would do normally is put a couple of small pieces of wood just into the base, and then normally I just add a single fire lighter. Everyone's got their own technique in lighting stoves, but I find this one works pretty well for me. Hopefully with a single match I can light the fire lighter. The stove's cold here in lighting, so I don't really need to wear gloves. I just find it a bit easier to load up the wood, and then a little bit like Jenga, I just build a little bit of a tower. One of the keys to getting a stove lit well is quite a lot of good dry kindling. We want to always try and get the flue temperature as high as possible, as quickly as possible whenever we're lighting a fire. All of the wood that I'm using here is kiln dried birch, I think it is we're using today, silver birch. And then normally I just set a single piece then in the top. Now, the stove, we will always open up the air control at the bottom. This is the secondary and tertiary air control at the bottom, so I'll open it full, and then I will just keep the door ajar for maybe about 5 minutes, and also open the primary air wheel. Whenever burning wood, primary air is only really used just to get the stove lit. So we'll leave that for a couple of minutes just to establish a good fire, and then we can come back to it and close the door and change the air controls. The stove's been burning about 3 minutes now, so I think it'll be fine to close the door. As I mentioned earlier, we want to try and get the firebox as hot as possible, as quickly as possible, and the reason for that is to do with the difference between smoke and flame. The difference between smoke and flame is temperature. So at a low temperature, it's smoky, it's dirty, and a high temperature, the fire's nice and clean. So now we're going to close the primary air wheel. Again, as I say, the only time we really use the primary air wheel whenever we're burning wood is just really to assist the lighting. It's just to give it a little bit of a boost. But there's enough air coming through. This flue system has quite a good draft on it, so there's enough air coming through the stove not to need this for too long. The Graphite 5 is a 5 kilowatt stove. When burning wood, it's rated at 84.3% net efficiency, which makes it one of the most efficient stoves that we have in the stove yard. The body of the stove is made from steel, so we have a 5mm steel body. The top of the stove is made from 10mm steel, and the base is made from 10mm steel. So it's a very heavy stove. It comes in around about 87 kilograms. So certainly in the 5 kilogram steel bodied stove, I believe it is the heaviest stove that we've got. Also, a unique feature that the Graphite 5 has is what's called a heat conveyor system. And basically what that means is at the back of the stove comes standard with a heat shield at the back. This is kind of like a scoop at the back of the stove, and air just from the room naturally draws up the scoop and then gets warm over the top of the underside of the stove and comes out through, I'm not sure whether you can see it in the camera or not, but comes out through these holes in the top of the stove, and that actually gives convection heat that comes out of the stove. Hot air rises, so it works on the principle of the colder air being down below the stove, and that's coming up over the back of the stove, gradually getting warm, and then coming out the top of the stove. What that means is that you're getting a radiant heat from the stove, but you're also getting a convection heat from the stove, which is quite unique for 5 kilowatt stoves. As with all the stoves we sell here in the stove yards, the stove is independently tested to the EN 13240 standard. It also is on the HEATAS registered appliance database, and for the south of Ireland it's also on the SEAI database. We find that a lot of our customers live in smoke control zones, So the Graphite 5 is also approved for burning wood in smoke control zones. So the stove's been burning now for just under 20 minutes. We can see we've got it's still the pre-fire here that we're burning. We've got a really good fire. I'm starting to get quite warm here standing beside it, kneeling beside it. But I think that at this stage here, I'm comfortable to turn down the main control in the stove. So as I mentioned earlier, the primary wheel is really for only assisting the lighting of the stove, or if you were burning mineral fuel, you would have it opened a couple of turns. So the main control is the secondary and tertiary air. So I'm just going to turn this down, and you'll see, I'll turn it down fully just so you can see the full effect of it. So we can almost turn the fire out. This would be a little bit premature at this stage because we're still just in the pre-fire stage, but I'll put it to the halfway mark, and we can see we can have a little bit more of a controlled burn. A common misconception with stoves is that the faster and the hotter you burn the stove, the more heat that you'll get into the room. This actually isn't true, because the more air you let into a stove, yes, the firebox will burn brighter, but all you're doing is just forcing that heat up the flue, so you're in fact just warming the chimney. So the stove's been burning roughly about half an hour now, so it's time now to do the refuel. To do this, what we always do is recommend just increase the temperature of the stove a bit, just by putting the air control open, and then open the door. Whenever you open the door, you want to, just because there's a different pressure, so you will see a little bit of ash stirring around, and we don't really want that ash to come onto the hearth. So just slowly open the door. If you open the door too quickly, you have a higher risk of ash coming in. Then we just break the embers down. We can see we've got lovely coal embers there from the wood, and then we're ready to put some larger pieces of wood into the fire. For this, obviously the inside temperature of the fire is very, very hot here, so would always recommend wearing gauntlets for this. Three good sized pieces of wood there. We'd expect these 3 pieces of wood to be burning for roughly about an hour and a half. The stove's been burning now for approximately 15 minutes since the refuel. So before we turn the air controls down, we really want for the wood to carbonate, and we can see that whenever the wood turns from sort of black whenever you first put it in to getting this sort of white pattern across it, and that's sort of showing that the carbon's being burned off the wood. So it's an indication that we're ready to turn the control down on the stove. So I'm going to turn it down to roughly about 30%, and there's quite a heat coming off the stove there. So we can see immediately the effects of it starting to calm down. As you can see from the video, we're burning the stove at a very controlled rate. There's still fantastic heat that's coming off it, but at this level of burn, we're going to get the maximum length of time from our logs. We could turn the stove down a little fraction more, which I'll do just for the sake of the video here, and you can see at this level here, it's a very, very lazy, slow burn. We're probably burning just slightly too low here, because we can still see through the video here that there is a little bit of smoke still coming off it, and the carbonization hasn't fully taken place in this log. So I'm just going to increase it back up to roughly about the 30% mark. And we can see immediately with the extra air coming through, although not a lot, that we're burning in a much cleaner way. As you can see from the close-up video here, the glass is perfectly clear. The clean burn on this stove is one of the best that we've seen here at the stove yard. The final feature that I'd like to mention on the Graphite 5 is that it can come with an optional extra direct air kit, which means for low energy houses or new build houses, the stove can connect to a direct air kit which will go outside, which means the stove will be breathing independently from room air. So there we have it, the Graphite 5 by High Flame, one of our favourite stoves here in the stove yard, and hopefully from this video you can see why we're so excited about this. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please like, please comment, and please subscribe. Thank you.